Let's talk about some random recent reads that I just haven't had the chance to talk about too much on my channel yet. I have a terrible habit of just like completely missing books when I'm doing wrap-ups, so this is just kind of an amalgamation of some random shit I've read in the last year that I forgot to include. I read Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay. This was a collection of feminist essays that she wrote. I feel like I got to know a lot about her, which is something I really enjoyed about these essays, because essay collections aren't really my sort of thing. I don't like short stories or anthologies or anything of that nature, but I feel like Roxane Gay is such a strong writer, and she's such a personable writer that I feel like these really worked for me. I love how she looked at pop culture. That's something I've always enjoyed, when people take like a political look or feminist look or anything of that nature. And Roxane Gay is a writer that I'm definitely looking forward to reading more of her work. I give this 4 out of 5 stars. I also read Stay Sexy, Don't Get Murdered by Kilgariff and Georgia Hardstark. This is obviously the book based around their podcast, My Favorite Murder, which is something I became obsessed with over the course of the pandemic. There's like 400 episodes of that podcast, and I binged all of them in the span of like 3 or 4 months. If you've listened to the podcast, you will have heard most of these stories from their book before, so I'm honestly not sure if I would recommend it. They do go more in depth, but still, I just feel like it was a lot of stuff I'd already heard from the podcast. So I gave this 3 stars. I actually think that if you haven't listened to their podcast before, this might be like a good thing to try out as an audiobook or something, to find out if you would be interested in their podcast. But really, they're funny people, and I just like enjoy them overall. So my cat just laid on my notebook. Cool. Hey. Okay, then I read Catch and Kill by Ronan Farrow. I didn't think I was going to enjoy this, but I absolutely love this. This is his nonfiction book about kind of how he started investigating the story around Harvey Weinstein. Ronan Farrow is one of the journalists who really broke this story of Harvey Weinstein, and he had to go through a lot to get that story to where it was. And he's not the first person who tried to bring this story up. And this really went into the kind of Hollywood sphere and just like how powerful Harvey Weinstein was, and the lengths to which many different corporations were willing to go to protect him. Like, I heard so much about the Harvey Weinstein story, I read so much about it when it first came out, that I didn't think this book would tell me anything new. But I actually think that this was very informative and gives you such a look into how this shit happens in Hollywood and how it gets covered up. I also think Ronan Farrow does a great job narrating his own work. I feel like his dry sense of humor really like shone through in the narration. I really enjoyed the little personal bits about his life. I also enjoyed like some of the other crazy aspects of the story that I had never heard before, because there really was some like weird spy shit going on. I definitely think like this is a really good one to pick up if you are at all interested in it, because it was really, really good. I think I gave this 4.5 stars. I also read the graphic novel A Fire Story, which was about the California fires, and it was a graphic novel writer. He kind of wrote his own experience of losing everything in the fire. He also included some of the people in his neighborhood and got them to give him their stories as well, and so like you really got a look at just a lot of different people's stories and from losing everything during these fires, and it was so sad. I read half of it in one sitting, and then I was like, okay, I have to take a break, because like I couldn't stop crying, because like I feel like he did such a good job of really conveying that emotion of just waking up with nothing. It was very depressing, but very well done, and so if you haven't read it, I would totally recommend it. I think once again I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I also read a graphic novel called Guantanamo Voices. I read the arc of this, and this was just a couple different perspectives and a couple different people who were involved in Guantanamo Bay in one way or another. They told their stories and just kind of like how these people are stuck in Guantanamo Bay for no reason. Like, we have this vision of Guantanamo Bay as like the worst of the worst criminals that we keep there, when that is not the case at all. And most of these people have just been kept in like this weird purgatory state where they haven't been charged with anything, but yet they can't get out because they haven't been charged with anything. They can't fight these charges if they're not there. But like, how are they holding them then? Like, it's so incredibly enraging and makes absolutely no legal sense, but that is exactly why it's there. That's exactly why they're holding them there, because there are no laws there, really. It was just crazy, and if you've ever wanted to know anything about Guantanamo Bay, I feel like this was a really good collection. It gives you a lot of information and a lot of different stories and different perspectives, while also being kind of like beginner friendly. So I gave that 4 stars as well. I listened to the audiobook of The Poppy War by RF Kuang. So I did this out of like FOMO, just like fear of missing out. Everyone's been talking about how amazing it is. I was like, all right, let's give it a shot. If I don't like this, clearly I don't like fantasy. And as it turns out, I don't like fantasy. I came away just feeling like I had nothing to say about this. Like, it just didn't do anything for me. I don't love war stories all that much. I just have nothing to say about this, and like, I know that everyone absolutely adores it, and that just leads me to believe that, yeah, it's probably good. It's just not my genre. Then I finally finished The Passage by Justin Cronan. I've been reading this book for like 3 years. I read it, I think like half of it, and then I put it down for like a year. I picked it back up, I was enjoying it, I read a little bit more, and then I put it down again. And now this time, I decided to start all over. I listened to the audiobook just to get back up to where I was, and then I read it physically after that, and I'm finally done. And I actually really, really like this. This is about basically some sort of infection and plague that spreads, but it all starts with this kind of government military experiment where they turn these inmates into vampires, basically. And then these vampires get out and it starts to overtake the world. But then there's also this mysterious little girl that they think could be the answer to this problem. And the thing about The Passage is it's like 2 books in one. There's part 1, which is all about how this entire thing starts, as well as meeting this little girl and this like FBI agent who is supposed to bring her in so that they can run some tests on her. And so that's part 1. Then that part ends and part 2 begins, and it's like 100 years later or 1,000 years later, I'm not totally sure, but it's like a huge time jump. And now we're into this completely different civilization because this plague like has overtaken the world, and now they have to like, you know, fight off vampires all the time. And it's just like a completely different situation, and so that's why I stopped reading, because like after I finished part 1 and I found out it was a completely different situation for the second half of the book, I was like, well, what the fuck? But I ended up really enjoying it. I really enjoy most of the characters. I really like this kind of dystopian situation. I like the vampires are actually scary and murderous. That's nice. What I will say is there is this one action set piece in the book that is so terrible, like it's so bad, that I really hope that Justin Cronan doesn't do a lot of that in the next 2 books, because I do plan on reading the rest of this series, but like the action piece was horrendously explained. It's funny because I would consider this somewhat similar to Stephen King books, and yet I don't like Stephen King, and this one worked for me, so don't know what that says. But I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I tried reading the Sandman graphic novels by Neil Gaiman. I read the first volume and DNF'd it. Couldn't do it. But then they put out an audiobook, and I was like, well, why not? I suffered through that bitch for no reason. I hated it. I don't know why I keep doing this to myself. I don't know why I insist that like, if everyone else loves this, I must like it too. Like, no, that's not gonna happen, clearly, with certain authors, and Neil Gaiman is one of them. I really hated the audiobook. I started off liking it. By the end, I just wanted to die a little bit because it was like 30-something hours long. I gave it 2 stars. I'm over it, and I never want to talk about it again. I'm all caught up on Rat Queens. This series is honestly such a mess. I love the series overall. This is about a group of girls, a group of adventurers who go on quests and kill different beasts, and they're called the Rat Queens. They like to swear, they like to drink, they like to have sex, and like they're just a lot of fun. There have been many different storylines, and they always seem to get really confusing after a while, and then it feels like the writers just like jump off a cliff and decide they don't want to finish it. Some of the stuff I've liked more than other people, it seems. I really liked a lot of the Bad Hannah stuff and like how that ended, but there's a recent ending that was terrible. I want to say it was volume 8. It was just straight up garbage. It made no sense whatsoever. It just ended like Once again, they like got themselves into a storyline and then they just like deked out. They're like, well, we're just not gonna finish this. We're just gonna like poof, everything's better and fine. It made no sense and it was awful. And I guess the series is over now. I don't know, man. I gave the final volume 2 stars, but like overall I would probably give this series 3 stars because it has been a really bumpy road. I also finished East of West. I really like this series overall. I don't necessarily know if I would say it stuck the landing, but I enjoyed it so much and I enjoyed so many of the characters that I would still give this probably 4 stars overall. I'm not even sure how I would explain this, but there's a bunch of nations at war. It's kind of got this Western feel to it, maybe a modern Western. And there's some horsemen of the apocalypse who are trying to, well, they're trying to start the apocalypse, but Death has decided he's going to go on his own way and find his like lost love. There's definitely a lot of politics involved, but I found it pretty easy to follow, which is not something I can say for all comics, so I enjoyed this one a lot. I'm also completely caught up in Saga. I didn't get the Saga love for a very long time. I'm sure most people have heard of this one at this point. Maybe in volume 5 or 6 that I finally started to really enjoy this comic series. Up until that point, I was really just like reading it just for shits and giggles, but around the 5 or 6 volume mark, I ended up loving it. There was the stuff with like what creatures were those? Like, they're like little groundhogs or something. That stuff like killed me. Also, I'm in love with Gus. He's so cute. I am overall loving the series. I'm all caught up. I didn't realize that like they just don't have an ending and we're all just like waiting on the writer to come back, so that sucks. I gave that 4 out of 5 stars as well. I also read Descender, which I know is very popular. I liked it okay. To be honest, this one didn't like do it for me in the way that most others did. I loved the first 2 volumes and then like didn't like the rest of it. So that was like a 3 stars. I read Anxious People by Fredrik Backman. I know that this ended up on either my most disappointing list or my worst list. I did not enjoy this like at all. I will say I rated it kind of high because I was like kind of grading on a curve because the book is so unlikable for the first half that by the time you get to the end you're like, well, at least I don't hate it anymore, so it kind of like brings up your rating in a weird way. But once like I sat with it and looked back on it, I'm just like, no, that was such a bad experience. It was so cringy. It's about a group of people who get kind of held up in this hostage situation during an open house. And then there's also like the police who are trying to figure out what happened. It's like a father-son duo trying to figure out what happened and how to get them out of here. I just hated it. Like, all the characters are so loud and obnoxious and just like super irritating and caricaturish. And I do believe that's intentional. Like, I think that they're trying to make them really annoying at the beginning so that they can have this character arc. But like, that did not work for me, especially because like all the bullshit near the end was so like sentimental and drippy and just like it was so mushy near the ending, and that stuff just doesn't work for me. Like, it has to feel earned, and it did not feel earned to me. It just felt like I was watching a Lifetime movie or something. So I would give it like 2.5 stars. I really didn't like this book, and it really bums me out because I really want to read Beartown by Fredrik Backman, and I'm hoping that his writing is completely different from this book because I have heard people say that this is like a very different book for him, and I'm hoping that's true because God, it was awful. I read Nailbiter Returns, which turned out to be terrible, which was really upsetting. I loved the original Nailbiter series. It was like such a favorite, and I thought I was gonna like when they brought it back because I kind of like how they started out. I didn't like that they kind of undid the ending of Nailbiter, but whatever. I was willing to go there. And it did not work. They really half-assed it. They pretty much said nothing. Like, I don't understand where they were going with any of it. It felt like they were going to go in some meta way and talk about like how obsessed we get with serial killers and how fucked up that is. And they just like really didn't go there when they could have. I don't understand any of it. It was terrible. Also read Maneaters, didn't like it. Maneaters was this very like meta feminist graphic novel series about this condition that happens when girls hit puberty. Essentially, if they start their period, they turn into a cat and attack the men in the world. I don't know. I just felt like this was a little too meta, and I almost felt like I couldn't follow the story that well because it was just like more supposed to be satire and like in your face, and I'm sure it worked for a lot of people, it just didn't really work for me. I didn't hate it, it just like, it very clearly wasn't my preference, and I feel like it's very much like you're either gonna love it or you hate it. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. I also did a vlog where I read books that BookTube made me buy it, and it was like Books in Lala edition, and I never wrapped those up in a wrap-up, and I figure I'll touch on those here. I read the book Dig by A.S. King. I don't really know how to explain this book. It's just about a bunch of people who live in the same town. Let's just start there. I didn't like this. Really, I loved A.S. King's way of writing. It felt almost like listening to a play or something. I really enjoyed that. I just felt like the end was very trite. It was trying to give this like big, overarching, actionable cause or something, but like it just didn't work. It felt really forced and just like really, like I said, like a really trite way of looking at it. It just didn't work for me whatsoever. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars, I think, because like the writing was good and I would absolutely read from A.S. King again. I just don't think the story worked, and also there was like 1 or 2 too many aspects to the story. Like there were 1 or 2 plot points you could have gotten rid of and the story would have stayed the same, so I don't know why they were in there. Also read Girls Burn Brighter by Shobha Rao. This is about 2 girls who live in India and are separated by very violent ends, and it kind of just like follows them for the next couple years of their lives as they try to make their way back to each other. This was wholly depressing, but once again, like her writing was fantastic. I would totally read from her again because like you instantly love these girls and they feel very fleshed out despite just like the absolute tragedy porn they are going through, because it is a lot and it goes farther than you think it's going to. I was pretty shocked at like some of the things that happened, and it was like, oh, those things didn't just happen once, they happened multiple times. It was a lot, and you have to be prepared for like what you're getting because it is just horrifying. But still, I gave it probably 3.5 stars out of 5. I also read My Lovely Wife by Samantha Downing. This is about a couple who kills together, and I thought I would love this, and I really didn't. I really didn't have great luck in this vlog. I gave this book 2 out of 5 stars because it was just so simplistic, and the few twists that there were very easy to see coming, and it just did nothing for me. Like I don't feel like I knew these characters pretty much at all. Like it just did not dig deep enough. I've realized that I really like my thrillers to be character studies. That's usually how they end up working for me. I also read Mapping the Interior by Stephen Graham Jones. This one I really loved. This was about a boy whose father had died, and he's kind of dealing with the trauma of that. Once again, I don't want to say too much because it is a novella. It's really short, but I just love Stephen Graham Jones' writing. I feel it's very evocative, it's very unique, and it always just like, it paints a picture for you in a way that few writers can for me, especially in horror. So I gave that 4 out of 5 stars. The other book that I read in that vlog was The Final Six by Alexandra Monir. This was about a group of kids who end up in this competition to go to space. Their world is like collapsing around them, and so this program is being run to basically try and save their planet or figure out something for their future. A lot of this revolved around like kind of a teenage love story. I really don't enjoy that. There was also a lot about like this conspiracy going on in the government, and once again that just didn't do a lot for me. I was hoping it would be more about the competition because I enjoy a good competition story, even in YA. But I just didn't end up loving this one. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. A smutty book that I haven't talked about yet is Asking for It by Lilah Pace. This was about 2 people who kind of meet coincidentally at a party, and they both realize that they are into some good old rapey roleplay. Most of the smut I read tends to beat around the bush, and they go more of the BDSM route rather than just straight up saying like, no, I'm just into non-con. And so that was kind of interesting, and I feel like they handled it decently well. I especially really liked the way the author handled the main character. I feel like her backstory, and like she has gone through some trauma, and the trauma was so well explored. There was a scene where that was very graphic, that showed what she had been through in her teen years. And I feel like the writer did such a good job of handling that with care, because when you're doing a smutty book that involves non-consensual roleplay, I feel like it could be very easy to then make a rape scene eroticized. And I feel like the author did such a good job of showing, no, this is the difference. This is the roleplay aspect, and this is actual rape. And like, they're not the same, and it is not okay. So I really appreciated that. What I didn't like about the book was the love interest backstory. I feel like we got a little too far into the, okay, everyone who's into this must have tragedy in their life. She had had a backstory involving sexual assault, and it was very believable, unfortunately, and whereas his was just like the worst thing you could possibly imagine, like double it, and that's his backstory. And it was a lot, and it was very tacked on to the end, so it just didn't really feel right. I think I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. I just appreciated, once again, like, two people who get together and do roleplay, and it doesn't have to be anything weirder than that. So I think that's all I'm going to talk about in this video. Who knows if there'll be more. I am always finding books that I've forgotten to talk about, so I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you come back in soon. Bye.